My guess is that this particular title may have gotten your attention. If it didn't, it means you didn't read this particular title. Speaking in tongues and other trending worship issues. We're going to look at the whole issue of expressive worship. We'll talk about that more. We're going to look at it from a data point of view. So we'll talk about that as well. And I think you'll find it fascinating. We're just going to present the facts. Most of you are way too young to remember Sergeant Friday when he would interview someone and they'd start talking all over the place when he just wanted the facts. He'd say, "Just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts." Well, that was a show called Dragnet. I know you don't remember it. You may remember a more recent movie, like recent being over a decade ago, but we're going to present somewhat just the facts. If you know Sam and me well enough, you know that we sometimes have commentary, and some of it is meaningful, and some of it is totally asinine. So Sam Rayner and I are going to talk about the National Congregation Study in terms of expressive worship. We'll be looking at that. Before we go there, thank you, California Baptist University. You are our great sponsor at this Rayner on Leadership podcast. They have been looking at the tribe called Southern Baptists, and they're reminding Southern Baptists that fewer than 20% of them have a bachelor's degree. Fewer than 20%. They're citing a Pew Research study, and they said, "What do you do when you need the training? What are you going to offer?" Well, CBU, California Baptist University, has a solution. It's an online bachelor's degree in Christian ministries. It develops servant leaders with the tools that they need to understand, communicate biblical skills. It really is a good degree. Financial aid is available thanks to CBU donors, and you can just check into this right now because you can sign up and take it whenever you want to. They come in segments of just every few weeks, and you'll have the opportunity to take different types of courses on an ongoing basis at your schedule and your time. So check that out. Check the link, California Baptist University, in their Christian Ministries and Christian Studies bachelor degree. Thank you for doing so. All right, Sam, this is an issue that we don't talk about that much on Rayner on Leadership. I know with yours and Josh's podcast on EST, and sometimes on the Church Answers podcast that I usually do, we talk about worship issues. We've talked about everything from bulletins to contemporary versus traditional versus blended, for whatever that means. Now we're going to talk about the issue of expressive worship. And just for you listeners and viewers, expressive worship is an informal type of worship where there is response verbally and through body movement, which would be everything from raising of hands to a lot of other things that we'll be talking about. Sam, are you excited about this one?
Hablo en lenguas. Bienvenido al show. Gracias por su atención.
Okay, well, we will give attention to this, and we will move forward with not necessarily another language, but at least glossolalia.
Oh, isn't that? I thought that's what we were going to do. You would talk, and I would speak in tongues.
Well, if you're assuming that speaking tongues is speaking another language, again, now we're getting into theological biblical interpretation of glossolalia. So we will just move forward here. So we're going to say there are trends in expressive worship that we want to talk about. So we're going to talk about these overall trends. Okay. Now, where did we get this information? The information, you can see it in the show notes, comes from the National Congregation Study. Now, here's the caveat. This is pre-pandemic data. I have some information beyond this in at least one of these points, but this is pre-pandemic data. And so Sam and I can guess, where are we? And as we record this in 2024, where are we in these issues? We can guess where we might be, but we're going to give you where the trends were going up to the pandemic because the National Congregation Study, at least in its current form, this longitudinal study, it's done in different years. It ended in 2019. So we'll begin to look at that. Okay, here's a couple of them. They have several of them. First of all, raising of hands and speaking in tongues. Now, I could put these as two separate points because they're two separate points in this study. And by the way, Sam, the study is fascinating. They do this from the total congregational point of view, and then they go out and interview individual congregates, not necessarily in the context of one church, but just individual congregates. And you have two separate studies. Both of them are longitudinal. One is the perspective from different churches. The other is a perspective from an aggregate of congregates. I'm going to focus on what they were saying the churches are doing. So our audience really wants to know, they want to know what churches are doing. So we're going to talk about that. Raising of hands. Sam, I haven't given you the data yet. I'm about to. So you're going to do this extemporaneously. What would you think the trend was? Up, down, level? What would you do? What would you think about the raising of hands?
Oh, I think it'd definitely be up. We got more hands raised at my church than we did in the past. I can speak just from my own personal experience, but I think the data would show that more people are doing this now than in the past.
And you would be exactly right. Because the raising of hands today, which would be, let's say 2019, the most recent data point, the raising of hands is now at 62.7% of churches. So that means that there's someone in that congregation that is expressive worshiping, and they are raising their hands. 62.7, but if you go all the way back to 1998, it's under 25%. So
Do you remember the old commercial, raise your hand if you're sure? It was for deodorant.
And Sure was the deodorant.
That's right.
Right.
Is
that like a 60s song?
Well, I could sing the jingle. I remember the jingle. I'm not going to, but
I remember the words. I don't remember the tune, but I remember raise your hands if you're sure, because what you were basically saying is I have no sweat under my armpit.
Well, I'm just wondering if this, correlation is not causation. So maybe what's causing this is better hygiene. Maybe that's the only reason why people are raising their hands more often. I don't know.
I don't think so. I really don't think so. Well,
these are the kinds of questions statisticians ask, demographers ask. You see this correlation, and you wonder, like, what's causing this? And it's like, I think it's the deodorant. I think that's what's causing.
Well, we do have an improvement in deodorant, particularly antiperspirant, which would affect this trend. We do. We do have a trend in that.
That's my point.
That is at best correlation, much less not causation. Good gravy train. I mean, it's
so if you're in a church where no one raises their hands, does that mean they're not wearing deodorant?
No, it just means they don't have expressive worship. You've got to get past this particular thing. This has nothing to do with, are you sure? It's raise your hands if you're sure.
Yes, that's correct. Not just one hand. You got to do both.
Oh my goodness!
I'm sorry. See, for our listeners, my dad wrote this episode. We take turns writing episodes, and my whole goal when he has written an episode is just to completely derail it. And I think I've accomplished my goal this time around.
You will hear more 60s music in the times that you have created.
Well, that's what you do to me.
I know, and I have never thought that this would end up in deodorant commercials. Antiperspirant.
I didn't either. It just popped in my brain.
Well, folks, if you're wondering what Sam's talking about, just Google raise your hands if you're sure. That's antiperspirant deodorant commercial. I don't know why I'm even saying that. That has nothing to do with expressive worship. Okay. How about speaking in tongues, Sam? Where would you go with that? Up or down? Or
up again. Yeah. And the question is, are people just more open about it or has it always been there? I know in my church, though we don't practice speaking in tongues like in the service as kind of a part of our worship, there are people that do in our church. And, I think that there's probably more in churches than we realize. And are people just feeling more comfortable doing this? I don't know, but I would say that it's definitely on the rise. That would be my speculation.
And you would be correct, but I would say it is gradually on the rise. Back in 1998, it was around 25%. And then in 2019, which is the most recent data, it is just right at 20. Well, it's almost 30%, 29.8%. So, it's not statistically insignificant. It's just not a big jump.
No, it's not a big jump, but I think that there is a growing comfort level with people speaking in tongues, and it becomes a question of degree and what does that look like, and what does the practice, how does that flesh itself out in a church? I know those are big questions, and there's probably listeners to our show who are continualists, some are cessationists. We're not really trying to make a qualitative statement as to whether you should or should not do this, but I do believe people are more comfortable with the speaking of tongues, particularly if it's not over the top or more overt. I know I've gone up to people who are, praying the altar at my church and heard them speaking in tongues. And for them, it was probably a private prayer language. I'm a continualist. We don't over practice this in our church, but it is something that happens. So, I think that people just have a growing comfort level with it. And I think it's probably more out in the open. And there's some that would say, well, these are misguided people. They shouldn't be doing that. And fair enough. If you're a cessationist, I understand the viewpoint.
And then there's the caveat position. I believe in it if there's an interpreter, which is part of the Corinthian way that Paul addressed the Corinthian church because there was disorder in the service. He said, y'all really need an interpreter present. So that would be another position between those two.
Yeah, and I will definitely say that there is not disorder in our service. I mean, these are things that are happening privately with people. This is not an interruption to the service. If that were to occur, yes, we would call for an interpreter, and if there was no interpreter, we would ask the person to stop. But honestly, we have a lot of speaking in tongues anyway because we have multiple languages on our campus. So I know that's not quite the same thing as glossolalia, but I do think that there's this idea of people being gifted with language. And we certainly have that on our campus because there's people that speak 3, 4, 5 languages even. Definitely a lot of bilingual people. I look at that as a blessing. I look at that as a huge blessing.
Yep. I've been in some of your worship services where you'll sing in English one time, then you'll go to Spanish the next time. It's kind of cool.
It's great. And we make sure that we have interpreters. This is not gibberish. This is actual languages that are being spoken. And we make sure that people understand what's going on and that it's not confusing and it's done in an orderly way. And I give my church a lot of credit. I think the people of our church handle it very well. So I understand there's a lot of different viewpoints of what does it mean when you say speaking in tongues, or are we talking about glossolalia? Are we talking about actual languages? Is there interpreter? Is there not an interpreter? I get all the arguments. I just envision that this will continue to rise steadily.
And this is, as you said, this is not a qualitative theological assessment. This is data that we're reporting from the National Congregational Study. So just as simple as that. I recently spoke in Ponce, Puerto Rico, and my favorite part of the service, certainly wasn't hearing me preach, and hearing the interpreter give it to the congregation in Spanish. My favorite part of the service was when we began to sing songs, one in English, one in Spanish. They were primarily Spanish speaking. So there were some that were bilingual. There were some that knew Spanish only, but had the words on the screen, whether they were in Spanish or English, but you would sing one verse in English, one verse in Spanish. It was really powerful, really powerful. Again, I'm getting away from the topic, but these are some of the things of expressive worship. Now, the return of the bulletin, that really didn't have a lot to do with expressive worship or not, but I put it in there because this one, there are two things that I get cards and letters on. And boy, did I get a heavy card and letter about the offertory not too long ago when I talked about how the passing of the plate has diminished in many churches. One guy did not like that. You would have thought that I would have denied the exclusivity of salvation through Christ, the substitutionary atonement, and the authority of Scripture all in one. I mean, he was all over me. This one is another one, the return of the bulletin trend, Sam.
Okay. Short-term trend probably up, long-term trend down. And what I mean by that is everyone got rid of it during COVID. Like nobody was doing it. So I would imagine that it's up more recently because we've gone from nothing to something. But long-term trend, I would say it's probably much less than it used to be.
Well, there's different ways of looking at it. The low in the study was 2012, and that was 62% of the churches had a bulletin in the service. Okay.
That's the high.
Yeah. The high was 2019, which was 66%. But we did a survey at Church Answers 2 years after what most of us call the return to worship. There were different times for different places. 2 years after worship, and it was under 30%. It had dropped dramatically even 2 years after the quarantine.
So this is a different number than I was expecting. The long-term trend was very stable until COVID, and then it has dropped just since then.
Yes, very stable until COVID. And as you indicated, there were no worship services, so there were no bulletins. Then when they resumed, there was a hesitancy to have anything physical handed out at any time. So it dropped, but it has not returned significantly. It's still fewer than 3 out of 10. I mean, that is a significant trend. Now, to be fair, I'm mixing two studies together. I'm giving you our survey from Church Answers, which is not the longitudinal study of the National Congregation Study. That may mean nothing to you listeners or viewers, and it really shouldn't. It's just simply for any of those statisticians out there that were ready to write me an email and say, you're mixing up statistical batches. I know that. But we're trying to give information on what's going on. And that is a significant trend that the bulletins are, fewer than half of what they used to be, from 6 out of 10 to 3 out of 10.
I view the bulletin as an opportunity.
Yeah.
I realize some people may disagree with me on this, and that's fine. That's what makes the show interesting, right? If we all just agreed, it would be a very boring show. I think it's good to put something in people's hands on the way in. Now, does it need to be the traditional classic bulletin with the order of service? No. But man, the opportunity to put something in someone's hand on the way in, or have it in the pew back or under your seat so that so you can call attention to something, some action item like go on a mission trip or give to the Capital Fund or whatever you want, sign up to serve in the children's ministry. We like to put 3 action items in our bulletins as to, we want you to do this, and here is where you go do it. I think that if churches don't have a bulletin, and by a bulletin, I mean something you put in someone's hand when they walk in, I think you're missing an opportunity. Now, if all that you're going to do is just put the order of service, save your money. You don't need to do that. But if you're going to call people to do something, that actual physical piece of paper is a great way to do it. So I like having the physical paper, and maybe I'm just getting old and I'm an old man, and hey, you get with the times and everyone can do it on their phone.
Don't say you're an old man. Don't say you're an old man. You know what that does to me?
I just turned 44. I just turned 44.
I'm so old I don't remember 44. All I remember is that was my high school football jersey number.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Okay. I've learned now. I've learned something new.
Except for my tearaway. My tearaway was 34. You don't know what a tearaway is, do you?
I do. It was a short-lived phenomenon in the football world that helped prevent you from being tackled. Your jersey, you couldn't grab the jersey because it just rip off.
Well, once it was banned from NCAA, just a little incidental part, the colleges had a host of them, and they didn't know what to do with them. So our little high school wrote the University of Texas, whose colors were closest to ours, and asked them if we could have their tearaway jerseys. And they graciously sent them to us. So,
okay.
And it lasted most of the season because we just gave them to the receivers and running backs. So we really had 2 different tones of orange out on the field, but we didn't care. And we didn't have all the
Hey,
correct
if you're
numbers
not
either.
if you're not doing bulletins, you probably should. We'll just
Oh,
we'll say it that way.
last question. Last question in the study. Are worship services getting longer? Sam?
No, I would say they're getting shorter, but not by much. I think there was a trend 10, 15 years ago to go longer, and I would imagine we're pulling back from that.
This one you are slightly wrong. You are correct when you say there's not much change. However, it has gone up from 75 minutes back in 1998 to 80 minutes in 2019. That's the median. So 5-minute
Man,
increase.
if you're going 80 minutes, you're going too long.
That was the median.
Sorry.
That was, and I agree with you. And by the way,
goodness gracious.
For those services,
and I say this, there are some traditions and cultures where you could go 3 hours and that's a normal service. I'm not talking about, traditions where that occurs. I'm talking about like a typical North American church where, what are you doing preaching that long? And nobody wants to sing that much. Maybe I'm just a curmudgeon. No.
Well, again, 80 minutes. And then within that, the median sermon length is 30 minutes. So there's 50 minutes, if you want to put those two together, of other stuff, mainly singing and other stuff.
Wow.
Who knows? Yeah.
Boy, this is Dad, we need to do more research here. So the median is 50 minutes of other stuff beyond the sermon in a
That's one of those things that Ryan Burge would find. We never talked about this, but if you put this together with this and you'll see this. Ryan, you're exactly right.
Yeah, he is. He's always right. Let me just put that because he's just the data guy. Well, that's worth investigating. I think really, hour and a half, hour 20 minutes. Hour 15 is kind of our max at West Bradenton. Of course, we have back-to-back services, but rarely do we go an hour 15. We're more hour 7, and on a long day, an hour and 10 minutes, and we try to be hour 5. That's really our goal.
You do it well.
So that's surprising. 65 minutes is really what we aim for. I'm surprised to hear that the median is 80 minutes. So of course, there could be listeners going, Sam, it's 15 minutes in the grand scheme of the kingdom of God. It's not that big of a deal. And you'd probably be right about that.
Well, here's the bonus. And this is not a question to you, and I don't even have it as a point in here. But according to the study, we're almost to the point where the use of drums is equaling the use of the organ. It's almost crossed now. So we
still use both.
You've been watching the organ usage go down. You've been watching the drum usage go up, and they're about to cross right at about the 43% point right now.
And last Sunday, we threw in melodica and hip hop along with the organ and drums.
Seems like y'all had a service one time that was brass, maybe trombones or something like that, if I remember correctly.
We attempted what was called Jazz Sunday, and it was as awful as it sounds. No offense to anyone who enjoys jazz music. If you enjoy jazz music, y'all
just did it very poorly back with the previous worship leader.
It was not the concept that was the problem. It was the execution that was the problem. That was many, many, many years ago, though. Many years ago.
But I do remember. In just a moment, Sam's going to thank our other sponsor, Upward Sports. Hey, let me say this before we get to that sponsor. We have a new church resources directory. It's free. You can click on the link right now. It is absolutely incredible because if there's anything you want to think about for a church, any area, whether it's education or whether it's a physical resource or a digital resource, or I'll just go down the list. There are hundreds there. We have that available for you. You can, it's free. You can get it as a PDF download or what I call a turnable, which means the pages turn and you don't even have to download it. So either one of those is just a free gift to you from Church Answers. There's nothing expected of you. Really cool resource that we're going to continue to grow over the years. Get that, download it, and in the meantime, in the closing, Sam's going to talk about Upward.
Yeah, we certainly want to thank our sponsor, Upward Sports. They do it better than anyone else. I know you want to reach your community. I mean, if you're a church, you should want to reach your community. And if you're a pastor or church leader, I understand that's your heart. if you want to reach families, if you want to dig into the neighborhood, this is the way to do it. Upward is the world's largest Christian youth sports organization. They will come alongside your church. They can take whatever part of your facility that you have available, whether you have a gym or not, and they can put it to use, and they will get your people interacting with the people of the neighborhood. And they do it through sports, which is something that is a wonderful bridge and it's universally loved. So you got to reach out to them. They have this 2024 sports startup grant. They're offering $500 to our listeners. I mean, not only are they sponsoring the show, they're getting you started with an extra $500. This is incredibly generous of them. Go to upward.org/church answers. Again, upward.org/church answers. Schedule your call. Then say, hey, the Rainers sent us, Rainer on Leadership, Church Answers sent us. That will help us out. But I would encourage you to reach out to them. This is a great way to go. We hear it all the time. How do you reach your community? Well, this is a wonderful way to do it. Upward.org/church answers. All of you listening, thank you. Thank you for tuning in. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, boy, our YouTube audience just keeps going up every week. Got some new subscribers and new people tuning in. We appreciate you watching. We appreciate you listening. Hasta luego.
Goodbye.